Hello, I'm so glad you're here. This is Jenna from McGuire. Today I am sharing with you ways to use up your pattern paper. Now, I'll be honest with you, I don't use pattern paper a lot because I like to create my own patterns. However, I, like many of you, get drawn into some of the beautiful pattern papers that are available. So I thought today I would just focus on simple ways to incorporate them into your card and maybe change them up a bit. Now, these are very simple techniques. I have done more kind of creative, elaborate techniques with pattern papers in past videos, and I will link to 2 of those below if you want to check them out. Today, we're keeping it simple. Also, be sure to stay tuned till the end of this video where I'll share my favorite of the cards and my favorite way to use my pattern papers. So let's get started. I will be using pattern papers from Memory Box today. I have 2 different pads here that I felt worked nicely together and had a lot to offer. Now, there are many different pattern papers out there that are beautiful, and you could use whatever you have with the techniques I show you today. I will say that I'm a big fan of Memory Box pattern papers because you can see like this one here has some gold foil to it and it's 2-sided with different patterns. So you get a lot of bang for your buck and lots of options from these paper pads. So one that I chose has like a plaid to it and the other I chose has some florals and other foil patterns. But again, remember, you can do today's card ideas using any pattern papers you have. I will show you how to kind of tone down some that might be a little bit too bold, really making the most of what you got. All right, now let's get started with my first card. On this, I'm going to show you how to change a pattern paper's color and also use pattern paper for die cutting. For that large flower, I'm using a new Memory Box die called Anemone. Now keep in mind, there are others that have the same style flower, and you can see the different options here. I like that these are available so you can pick and choose or use the different ones together. I will be using the large flower in this one and the flower over on the right later in this video. Memory Box is really good about offering collections that work well together. And by the way, in case you didn't know, Memory Box, Birch Press, and Poppy Stamps are all related companies, so you might see similar styles among them and they work well together. I thought it'd be fun to create this layered flower using a plaid pattern paper, just so it has a little interest to it. Now you could use any type of pattern paper for this, but since we're doing layers to this die cut, I thought a softer, more subtle pattern would be best. If you have just a solid die cut, maybe like a solid heart or a solid flower, you could use more of a bold pattern if you'd like. So I've cut all of the pieces of this flower from that same purple plaid paper piece. And I am putting them onto my waffle flower grip mat, which will just hold the die cuts in place as I add a little bit of ink. I have chosen a soft purple ink color here, and I'm putting a little shading on the die cut. When I used pattern papers with die cuts for any kind of layering, I like to put a little shading on the edges. It'll give a little more definition between the different layers of the pattern die cuts. And you can see I chose to do a purple here just to make that purple stand out a bit more. Often when I'm using multiples of different pattern papers on one card, I will do inking on the edge of the pattern papers. That way, if they're up against each other, there'll be more definition between the 2 patterns and the patterns won't fight as much. I really feel that inking the edges really helps a lot with your pattern papers. But you will see some different options today where I don't add that inking, so you can do a little comparison. So I continued to add that passion fruit color to the flower die cuts, but I thought it'd be fun to also put a little bit of blue on the outermost tips of these petals. This is a cornflower blue, but I'm putting it on very lightly. My background will be purple, so I thought it'd be fun if the die cuts had a little blue so it would stand out even more. But you definitely can still see that soft plaid. I could have used a plaid with more contrast, but I really wanted to go for the softness today. Another thing that I like to do when using pattern paper for die cuts is to glue a white cardstock die cut behind it. There's a few reasons. The first is pattern paper is often thin, and this will give it some strength. The other reason is by adding a little bit of dimension behind it. When we layer it together, you will again really enhance the layers, make them stand out a bit more from each other. So by adding the inking on the edges and a little bit of dimension between each layer, you can really see each of the individual flower petals, even though we use the same paper for all of them. Another great reason to try using pattern paper for your die cutting is it's a great way to use up those pattern paper scraps that we don't want to get rid of. And you can see how my flower is starting to form. Another thing you can do is add some ink after you've glued your layers together. So this will really allow you to add more shadows where you desire, or you could even use white pigment ink on the areas where you want a highlight. If you want to pull in an additional color for a bit of contrast on your layered die cuts, you could pull in another pattern paper or a colored cardstock, but what I like to do is use a metallic cardstock. That way you add a little bit of shine and you're really not fighting with that pattern that you've already used. So here I used a gold matte cardstock. There is one die cut that's meant to be green. I still use that purple pattern paper, and I'm just coloring it with a darker green ink. So the tips are actually a little bit purple, but I think it works out just fine. I didn't want to go and dig for some green pattern paper to use. Now here I am trying to choose what pattern paper to use for my background. I was just determined to use some of this beautiful paper, but I felt like a lot of the patterns were a little distracting from the flower that we're putting on top. So I chose this one that is cream with this like gold foil pattern to it. And I'm changing the color of it using the same color of ink that I used to add the shading on my layered flower. At first I was using a blending brush. You can do that if you want a soft look. But I really wanted to change all of that off-white to a purple. So I just went direct to paper. Now this will soften a little bit as it absorbs into the paper. And so I decided to go a little bit darker, and I came in with a darker heather color just to really allow me to have more contrast between the background and the flower we're putting on top. And with that, I'm really happy. So if you have a pattern paper that you're struggling to use, try inking it to change the look. I will give a better example of that technique later in this video, so stay tuned for that. So now I'm trimming this background down to add to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. I am trimming the sides kind of evenly so that I cut the pattern nicely, making sure I kind of cut through the pattern on the same on all sides. I'll talk a bit about that later too. I'm also using that cornflower just to add a little bit of blue around the edges. Again, adding ink to the edges of pattern paper is a great way to really make it stand out and give a clean look. All right, so now I can glue my card together, but I decided I did need some leaves to add to the flower. So I'm using an older Memory Box Leaf Bunches die. Now this die set cuts a bunch of different leaves. I cut them from the same light purple plaid, and I'm again going to ink them with that moss color. So don't be afraid to use whatever light pattern papers you have and ink them with whatever darker colors you want. You don't have to stick to the same color family. It's a great way to make sure you use what you have. I had leftover of this light purple plaid, so instead of letting it go to waste or into my drawer for later, I'm using it for the green leaves. You may notice one of my leaf die cuts there has a little notch taken out of it. That's because I was really trying to use the leftover paper. I'll just cut that leaf off and no one will ever know. And as I did with the flower, I have die cut the same leaf from white cardstock and I'll glue it back to the back of that pattern paper just to give it a bit of dimension and a bit of strength. Now we can glue all of these pieces together on our note card. I wanted a bit more dimension behind my flower so I can tuck my leaves behind it. So I'm using foam squares for this. Now normally I don't like to use foam squares behind die cuts because they can get squished in the mail. However, I gave extra strength to my flower by adding those extra die cuts. So it's strong enough that even if it gets pressed in the mail, it won't get like crushed or wrinkled. It'll hold up just fine. Now I have some room to slide these leaf die cuts underneath. You may notice also that I'm allowing my die cuts to hang off the edge. This is a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. When I allow those die cuts to hang off the edge, I'll need a bigger envelope, but that's okay. You could use a 5x7 envelope, but what I choose to use is an A6 envelope, which is just a bit bigger and will give us that bit of extra room. I'll link to those below in my description. Now for a sentiment, I chose to use one of the new debut script dies from Memory Box. I told you they always offer a lot in a collection, so you can pick and choose what you like. I really like the classic style of these sentiments with a little bit of playful twist to them. Now, I am showing you all the different options there are, and I'll be using a few of these in today's video. I really like the Happy Spring. I didn't use it today, but that definitely will be put on my desk to use in the future. There's greetings, happy birthday, hugs, miss you, hello, just a note, and thank you. And for this first card, I'll use thank you, and I'll use a few others later on. And two other reasons why I really like these, they come with the shadow die, so it will stand out on your card, and the sizing is just right. So I used white to create the shadow for the word thank you, and then I used black glossy cardstock for the word thank you itself. I really like using black glossy cardstock because it adds a little bit of shine and allows your sentiment to stand out even more. Now I did a combination of liquid adhesive and foam adhesive on this so that it would be right along the edge of that flower, and I thought putting it at an angle just added a playful, unique twist. I finished the card off by adding some gold pearls, which match the foil on the background and the gold matte cardstock that I used at the center of the flower. Here's a closer look at the pattern on the flower. It's very subtle because of the pattern paper that I chose, but I think it adds a fun interest to it. I also have the background that I changed from off-white with foil to purple with foil, which really pulls everything together nicely. So this is a reminder that you can change the color of your pattern paper and use pattern paper for die cutting, even with layering dies. All right, let's move on to another card. Now, this isn't really anything creative with pattern paper, but just a few reminders. Now, first, let's get some of our pieces together, then we'll add that pattern in. This is the Poppy Stamps Nordic Flourish background die, the one that's on my desk there. And then there are the Nordic Flourishes, which are there on the right, that coordinate with it. I'm only using the background today, and I like that background so much that you can see over there on the side, I have die cut a bunch of them from cardstock and have them ready to go. I often do this when I find a die I really like so that I can put it to good use often. I'm using another die set that I really like. This is the Poppy Stamps Nordic Crown Flower die set. Love the style of this. It's very unique. And as I mentioned before, Poppy Stamps, Birch Press, and Memory Box are really good at creating collections that you can mix and match together. So this is from the Nordic collection. I use the background die from that collection. This flower is from this. And later you'll see doves and you'll see a butterfly. They also have like bears, deer, fox, you name it. They've got a lot of different options with this Nordic feel. And I really like the detail and layering style that it has to offer. By the way, I'm just explaining how I choose different products to use. I often look for companies that offer a collection of styles, and if I like that collection, I can kind of use them together in different ways. So that's why I'm mentioning all of that. All right, now I am creating one of the layered flowers here using some printed paper from Memory Box. I'll show it to you later, and it matches perfectly with the plaid background I'm using. By the way, here's a close-up look at the details that the die offers. You know me, any kind of layering detailed die always wins my heart. Now I wanted to give this flower something to sit on, so I die cut a white oval from Spellbinders. I use this oval set a lot because it fits nicely on the front of an A2 card. And I chose a smaller one so that I just have a backdrop for my flower, but will be able to allow a lot of the background to still show around it. I really wanted a lot of layering on this card. So I have the Nordic background Flourish die over there. You can see I've cut it from white cardstock and light teal cardstock, and I glued those together. I'm going to put this onto a piece of plaid pattern paper, but I'm not sure which side of the plaid pattern I'm going to use. I originally thought I would use the teal pattern. That would really match nicely with the flower, but then I noticed the back side of it that has teals and greens would also look nice. I could also use a white flourish here that would stand out even more. And that's what I'm showing here with the back side. So what I'm doing here is considering the different options. And as I was doing this, I thought maybe a dark green plaid would look good behind it. And I realized all of the options would work really well. So I plan to make more of this card design using some of the different pattern papers in the back. So these pattern papers won't be the focal point on the card, but they really add a lot of interest. So I will make more of these later on, and that will give me an opportunity to use up some of these pattern papers that otherwise would just go sitting on my shelf. So I decided to use that darker teal plaid in the end, and I glued that onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. And then I put my Flourish background and then the flower on top. Now that Flourish background die cut again is a light teal cardstock, so that it didn't have too much contrast, but you definitely could make it stand out with white cardstock die cut if you prefer. So here's the final card, and there's a lot going on in this card, and I'm really enjoying creating cards like that these days. You have all the layered die cuts, you have the pattern paper. I even added little Trinity Stamps moonstone gems to the tips of the flower petals. I like having all of these details on one card, but you could skip certain elements if you wanted. By the way, that hello is from a Simon Hurley foiling die set, which I'll show you later in this video. Now this next card is very simple, but I wanted to share a tip that I find helpful when using pattern papers for backgrounds, especially when a lot of the background is showing. Now this plaid has a repeating pattern of gold foil stripes. It's kind of hard to see here, but you'll see it in the end. Now, when I go to cut a background from this, I could just cut from the edge and randomly kind of cut the pattern. However, I find that a card looks better visually, at least to me, if the pattern is centered up. So I am cutting a little bit off of both sides until this is about 4 inches wide. And I'm making sure that the gold stripes in the plaid are centered up. So you can see that those gold stripes are centered up. The plaid pattern is centered. This just looks visually better, especially when your pattern is really a focal point of the card. So say you have a dot repeated pattern on your paper, you want to cut so that the dots kind of end in the same place on the left and the right. And I usually do that with either using a rectangle die or cutting off a little bit on each side until I get the pattern where I want it. Now here I'm cutting off the top. I'm not making sure this is centered top to bottom. I really just did along the sides. I will add this piece to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. Now for the die cut at the center of this, I used the Poppy Stamps Nordic Fanfare butterfly dies, and I created the layered butterfly from white and gold cardstock. Now whenever I have a busy pattern background, I like to use die cuts that are basically neutrals, either a white or a black or a gold or a silver. That way they don't fight with the busy background. So here I did white and gold together. Now that sentiment there is, sorry, my head gets in the way, is foiled with gold foil and die cut with the coordinating die from the Simon Hurley must-have sentiment set that you see there on the left. This foiled sentiment was actually left over from a previous video that I did, and I'll link to it below in my description and up here on the top right corner. So I had a leftover sentiment that worked great here. And I did glue extra die cuts behind it just for that added dimension and so it stands out against the busy background. I also did add some little light blue gemstones to the butterfly to pull out the blue in the background. Also notice again that that plaid is centered left to right on the card, so it creates that nice center area for that butterfly and for the sentiment. And the die cuts we put on top are kind of neutral so that the pattern really can show and it doesn't fight with it. This basic card design would work with a lot of different pattern papers in the background, so I decided to do a second. This time I'm using a more bold pattern paper in the background. Now it was almost a little bit too bold. It had white and pink flowers against that dark green background, and I wanted to make it more of a pattern with all pink flowers. So I am again inking my pattern paper. I'm using a light peach color here, so my flowers will turn peach, but that dark green will really pretty much stay a dark green. So earlier in this video, I changed an off-white pattern paper to be purple. Here I'm just adding a little bit of pink to change it up. And this will cause those flowers to be a little bit less contrast from the background than the original pattern paper. And it just seemed to work better with my card. So I encourage you to try changing your pattern papers, maybe some you haven't used, by inking it up lightly with some colorful ink. For some of the layers on my butterfly, I'm using these color paper packs from Memory Box. These are 6x6. They're color on both sides. And what I like about them is there are a bunch of different color packs. I'll show some later. But there's a light, medium, dark, and extra dark in each of the color families. So you really can find just the right color for any project. And in this case, I can do the light, medium, and dark that match nicely with my pattern paper. Now I still used white at the base so that it would stand out against that busy background, but I thought that touch of those red layers was helpful. And I also added gold metallic cardstock for the body of the butterfly so it would stand out too. So you can see how the flowers on the background of my card match nicely to the cardstock that I used on the butterfly because I inked that background up a bit. So don't be afraid to change up your pattern papers. Now here's a closer look at the completed card. I did add some of those moonstone gems, once again, to the butterfly for a little bit of sparkle. The Sending Hugs is once again from the Simon Hurley Must-Have Sentiment Foil and Die Set. Again, left over from a previous video. My next card uses that same pattern paper, but this time I'm not inking up those flowers, so they'll stay bright white. Let's start by creating the window. I'm using the Poppy Stamps Arched Gothic Cathedral Window die set. There are 2 dies that you can layer together or use separately. I like this one a lot too, so I already have a bunch cut from white cardstock. I'm gluing those white layers together, and then I'll glue that entire window onto a piece of vellum. Vellum is a great thing to use with your bold pattern papers, because notice when you put the vellum on that bold pattern paper, it softens it a bit. That will give you a nice soft spot for your focal points to sit on, so they aren't too overwhelmed by the pattern in the background. You could just die cut a basic shape from vellum, but here I am putting it on the back of this window die cut. So now it has that soft area towards the center. I trimmed my background down to be about 4 1/4 by 5 3/4 inches. So this will go on an A6 card. It's a bit bigger, but I really like using that bigger card size. I thought it'd be fun to add some birds to the window. So over on the left there, I have the Poppy Stamps Nordic Bird Bunch die set. It creates 6 different birds with that fun layer look. I'm also going to use the older Poppy Stamps Nordic Bird die, which just creates 1 bird, but he's a little bit bigger. You can see I like this bird so much that I've already created a bunch of them using scraps of silver matte, silver glitter, and blue cardstock. Not using those birds today, but I just wanted to show you how you can create so many from one die set. All right, so off screen, I created 3 different birds using that same Memory Box paper that I used on my last card, and I'm using up the scraps. I also added little black gemstones to the eyes and some moonstone gems along the background for a bit of sparkle. Now the note card itself is 4 1/2 by 6 inches, which is typical A6 card size, and I'll put it in an A6 envelope, which I have linked below. Also, I used the debut script Just a Note. I did white for the shadow and black glossy for the word, and that really stands out nicely against the background. You can also see how that bit of vellum inside of the window softens that bold pattern so it doesn't compete with that sentiment and birds that we put on top. So remember, vellum is a great partner to fun, bold pattern papers. My next card is another for using bold pattern papers as a background, but this time I'm going to do some backset die cutting. So it's a simple technique. I'll show you how to do it. For this, I'm using the Poppy Stamps Nordic Dove die set. Now, I really like this bird die set so much. I love the layers to it. So you can see a while ago, I made a bunch of these birds using some of those colorful Memory Box paper packs. I even made a couple cards. I did these a couple months ago just for fun. This one uses the Nordic border dies in the background for white on white with some added dimension, and then a few of those little bird die cuts. I also created this one using the same products, but I made an impression with the die and rubbed ink over it. I have a lot of these birds left over to use on future cards. I do always get around to using them. Probably will work on them some this weekend. Now for this card today, I'll be using 2 of those birds in the kind of lavender color because it matches nicely with that floral lavender paper that I want to use on the background. Now this technique works with any dies that you have a shadow die for. Now these doves come with a shadow die, which I normally would probably put the colorful dove on a white die cut, but here I'm using it to create a window. I'm also using the shadow die for this debut script Hello die set, and I'm cutting the 2 shadows of the birds and the shadow of the hello directly from our background. We're going to create 3 windows on our background. I really wanted to put some dimension behind this piece, but remember, pattern paper is often thin and it would get crushed in the mail. So I've cut 2 pieces of white cardstock to be the same size as our pattern paper. I'm holding it behind the pattern paper and popping the dies into those die cut openings. I'll run this through my die cut machine, and this will cut the same die cuts in the same position on that white cardstock. And I will repeat this with another piece of white cardstock. That way I can glue these behind our background and it'll give it some nice strong dimension. Now keep in mind, you could totally skip this dimension if you want and just glue our pattern paper with the windows cut directly onto the note card. Totally up to you. By the way, these pieces are cut to be 4 1/4 by 5 3/4 inches, and I'll be putting them onto a note card that is A6 size, which is 4 1/2 by 6 inches. I really am liking playing around with bigger card sizes, and keep in mind that this card size in 5 by 7 cards costs the same to mail as if the card was the traditional A2 card size. Really, the size, like the overall dimensions, don't matter with the shipping. It's the thickness that matters. All right, so now I'm adding this onto the front of our note card, and you'll see we have these little wells or windows for the birds and the hello. I will glue my layered birds into the openings along with my hello sentiment. So the die cuts are kind of set back behind the pattern paper, but you do have that opening around it so that it'll stand out nicely. It just creates for a really unique look. Now I did add some black gemstones kind of scattered in the background, which look nice along with that black glossy cardstock that I used for the hello die cut. In this design, again, I could use up a bunch of my pattern papers and just change up what colors of cardstock I used on those birds to match whatever pattern paper I used. And this brings us to my favorite of the cards for today and my favorite way to use pattern papers, and that is using up those little scraps that we save. So I have all of these thin pieces of pattern paper scraps left over from the cards I made today. There are so many ways you can use them. One of my favorite is to just put them horizontal along a card, kind of scattering them a bit. In fact, I've done a video showing a design like that, and I will link to it up here in the top right and in my description below. I don't want to do that same thing again, so I thought I'd show you another way to use some of these pattern paper strips or scraps. And I do encourage you to keep all of these. Even the smallest bit can be used. Now the design I'm going for today is I want 3 of my wider pieces to come down from the top left corner. You could use like 2 wider pieces and 1 narrow, totally up to you. You can mix and match your patterns, but I thought I'd use these 3 pieces that are the same pattern but different colors and use them together. Now these 3 are pretty bold patterns, and you can kind of guess that they would get a little busy on top of each other. But I'm going to keep the rest of the card very simple so it doesn't feel too busy. And not only am I keeping it simple, I'm using mostly white cardstock. So I'm using this Pinpoint background plate. You can see I like it too. I've already cut it a bunch from white cardstock. And I'm gluing that onto a white note card, just for a little texture, but nothing too distracting. I also put additional pieces of white scrap cardstock behind my pattern paper. That will give it that little bit of dimension that allows it to stand out more. That little bit of shadow around the edges really makes a big difference and allows it to stand out. I will tuck this piece kind of underneath the other one, and then this one will go on top. I'm using a mix of liquid adhesive and tape runner here so that I can move the pieces until I'm happy with the placement and then trim the excess off the top. So you could really use any 3 patterns here that kind of go together well. You either want the patterns to look well together or have a similar color between them. That's also very helpful. Now the die cut that I'm going to put on top will be from all white cardstock. That way it's not fighting with the patterns below. So I'm using a few of my different tips today all together on one card. Another thing I could have done on these pattern paper strips is inked the edges a little bit. That would have also provided more contrast between the patterns, but I thought it looked okay as is. So I'm using another floral die here, all cut from white. I did decide to add some little gemstones inside of the flower. I felt some sparkle would be good. And I used a very simple, basic sentiment strip that I had in my leftover drawer once again. Now, the reason this is my favorite of the cards is because I was able to use up those pattern paper scraps that I either would have let go to waste or I would have put in a drawer and forget to use later. I also can use any white die cuts I want on top in any sentiment. By keeping everything else white, that pattern paper really shows through even though I covered up quite a bit of it. So there you have just some simple ways to kind of rethink how you use your pattern paper and make it easier to use with other products you may have. If you're interested in what I talked about today, the different things I used, I always link below in my YouTube description. And I also have links to the videos that I mentioned there too. Now, if you are interested in seeing photos of these cards or learning more about any of it, you can head over to my blog. It's linked up here on the top right. And a couple other related videos on pattern paper use are linked here too. Thanks for spending this time with me. Have a great day. We'll see you soon.